Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week we'll be doing chapters 8 through 11 of The Way of Kings. Eliot, can you tell me 2 words that you came up with for this passage?
I did. So coming out of these chapters, the 2 words I would go with are taking and saving.
Taking and saving. Okay. And
Yep.
Paul, what did you have?
Not quite as deep. Um, I have perseverance and teaching.
Perseverance and teaching, taking and saving. Let's discuss these. Taking and saving. Eliot, talk to me about taking and saving. What does this mean?
So I got taking and saving from one specific quote that comes in, well, the full quote comes in chapter 10, the flashback chapter that we get with Kaladin's father, but Kaladin talks about it a little bit earlier. And if I can find it, I'll go ahead and read it actually.
Okay.
So when Kaladin is talking with his father, they're kind of having an argument. We're gonna talk about it in a second. But Kaladin's father says there are two kinds of people in this world, son: those who save lives and those who take lives. And I thought that was a really deep moment for this, not just these sections of these chapters, but really the whole part one of the book in general. So that was my 2 words.
It's certainly it's good that you pulled that out because that will certainly be coming back and it's been mentioned already multiple times. And it's certainly Kaladin's philosophy that he's been fighting with going into the army, and you get a little insight into that for chapter 10.
Yep.
Because he has a quote in chapter either 9 or 11, I don't remember, but he's talking about how there's a big group of third people who just exist to either be saved or to be killed, and there's no reason for them to be living. It's kind of
Yep.
his depression pulling in. So
Yep.
it's certainly been talked about multiple times. All right, Paul, talk to me about your 2 words.
So first of all is perseverance. I feel like it's a very broad perspective uh, description of these chapters. First off, with Shallan, you have her being denied several times her wardship with Yasna and ends up persevering, and we'll see where it gets her. As well as with the Kaladin chapters, he's in the most dire of straits, and he, takes a lick and he keeps on ticking. He he keeps going. My second word is teaching, and it relates a little. I was thinking like a little bit with the Shalon chapters, in that she learns with some stuff with like the ardent and some almost life lessons throughout her experiences, and mostly focused though on the flashback Kaladin chapter though with his father, and like like Elliot said, with taking and saving lives, there's a lot of lessons that Kaladin's father taught him, and so that was why I chose that word.
Okay. Let's talk about perseverance and the Shalon chapters, chapter 7 and chapter 8. She has been denied multiple times, even, and she keeps trying, even to the point of Yasna being angry with her that she's still there. Yasna walks into the alcove where she's she's Shalon's still waiting for Yasna even after she's denied her, I think twice at that point. And uh Yasna is not happy with her, and Shalon is still even tries a time after that, and finally gets accepted at the end of chapter 8. So
Well,
perseverance, certainly.
Shalon Shalon needed a little bit of encouragement, though, right? She had gotten to the point where she was pretty much ready to give up and not even go back to Yasna, but then y'all jumped in and said, third time's a charm, basically. You got to go try. You got to try at least 3 times, and that was kind of what pushed her to go back and try that third time.
Yeah.
That's true. I like the mention of Yalb, actually. I think it's a character that, uh, in all honesty, at first I didn't really think anything about Yalb or really care for Yalb, but it's actually really cool. And I like the kind of the contrast that they have with Yalb and Shalon, in that Shalon is very like intelligent, book smart, and Yalb is kind of this rough pirate
Yep.
and has the street knowledge,
Mhm.
and is able to help Shalon out of a lot of difficult situations, such as when dealing with the bookstore owner who's uh, kind of a
Yep.
cheat and such. And Yasna is very like, or I say Yasna, I mean Shalon has this like really proper mindset and attitude with things, and Yalb kind of gives a little more of the common sense side, and I think it really helps Shalon a lot. And I think it's a really, really interesting character.
He definitely balanced her out quite a bit. He's a little more down to earth, where Shalon's maybe a little bit up in the clouds.
Sure, and I think my favorite thing about Yab, that what makes him special compared to the rest of the characters so far, is I feel like if you kind of look at the characters we've seen, they have a more stark contrast, or stark like good or bad side. And I feel like Yalb kind of has a mix of the two. He's more like neutral, but he's not upright. He cares, about Shalon. He wants the best for her and probably, his friends and such, but he's caught, gambling, cheating the guards there in a Carbranth and such. And so he's not too considerate and too upright, but he has good intentions.
His
So I think it's an interesting contrast.
his ethics are good, but his morals might blur lines.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. Yeah.
I do think he's a good character because he walks into the bookshop, and the bookseller and Shalon are both way more educated than he is, and yet he outsmarts both of them just by walking in and saying, "Hey, your rival's selling this book for a fraction of the price. How could you sit here and listen to this ridiculous price?" And the bookseller's
Yeah,
like, "Oh shoot,
he knows how to push everyone's buttons, which I think
he
is
does."
yeah, he knows exactly what to do. Um, and he doesn't mess around with any kind of formalities and such. So
He's a pretty slick con man for sure, and it takes Shalon a few seconds to kind of catch up to him before she realizes that Yalb's the one ahead of the game here.
Yep.
for sure. I also think it's interesting, with him in the city, the city of bells, right? Like I don't know that much about the city, but from what I can tell, it's like kind of it's where the higher ups and the well educated kind of people are, and so it's an interesting contrast there.
Yeah, Carbranth is definitely the Athens of Roshar, if you will, a city state of knowledge, and it has the Palaneum, the biggest library in Roshar, and Yasna's come here to study. We don't know why yet, but she's here to study. And Kaladin's father in chapter 10 mentions kind of offhand that he wants to send Kaladin to Carbranth to study as a surgeon. It's definitely a meeting of the minds area in Roshar that people come to study and learn.
So the other thing that we learn about in chapter 7, or we learn more about, is soul casting,
Mm.
which I definitely have some more questions now about soul casting. Shalon talks about the fact that her father used it to gain wealth for their estate, for their family. Is that frowned upon? Is that not an okay use of soul casting? I would figure if you've got this magic, you should be able to turn whatever you want into whatever else you want. But she seems like embarrassed of it, like they were hiding it. What that doesn't make sense to me.
Right. I do think it's funny that the more you learn about soulcasters, the more questions you have instead of the more answers that have been received.
Yes.
But no, so soulcasting is more perceived as a magic as opposed to other fabrials that we'll come across in the future. It's still not fully understood how it works, and so it's definitely perceived as holy or sacred. So if you have a fabrial, the Vorin Church believes or wants all of the fabrials to be protected and kept safe and taken care of. That's why Shallan mentions offhand that the Vorin Church must be squirming in their chairs to know that Yasna has a soulcaster.
Oh yeah, she did
Um,
say that.
yep, and so it's if you have one, you're supposed to give it to the Vorin Church because it's supposed to be holy. So if Shallan's father
Mm.
kept one secret to further their wealth.
So Shalon mentions that, right? But they did it say that anyone like ever found out about this? Is this like a rumor, or was this found out and kind of frowned upon by a lot of people? I don't actually remember for sure, or if this was just
I
kind of Shalon's like she was kind
I
of like
I,
thinking this.
I thought in the chapter that she talked about she has that broken Soulcaster Fabrial with her, right? And she's
Mm,
planning to swap it out with Yasna's. That's her plan, is to steal Yasna's working one and swap it out with the broken one. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, she is just like keeping this to herself. I wasn't sure if like
Yeah.
her father using it was like public knowledge. I guess. I
her
feel like that's a really big
her
no
father
no.
being dead isn't even public knowledge, and the fact
That's right.
the fact that he has a soulcaster is certainly not public knowledge. So they're
Hmm.
trying to uh steal Yasna's because his doesn't work anymore.
Very sneaky. It makes me really curious about where Shalon's storyline is going to go because she's this very astute, upright, moral, ethical, young woman, and then we find out that she has this intent to steal Yasna's soul casting, gem
Yeah,
and such. So, I'm very curious to see what happens there.
she's
There's been some rather cryptic references back to her father's death. I do think that something a little bit suspicious is going on there, because Shallan has kind of flashed back to it a couple times, but we don't get many details. It's very cryptic, and it's really making me wonder if somehow maybe it was an accident, or Shallan was involved somehow, or I think there might be something a little darker there that we're not getting yet.
yeah,
I think there's definitely more to come.
it mentions it and then she deliberately shoves it away and doesn't think about it.
Right.
And yep, there's it certainly hasn't given you many clues yet.
Ominous.
Very good thought. Um, so despite her bad intentions, I feel like that's scary because if anything goes wrong with her plan, right? I think Yasna is not someone you'd want to have. You would not want to be on her bad side.
Right.
She seems very, she'll do what she wants, says what she wants, and if she wants you gone, or I don't know, worse, it'll happen. So Shalon is, in dangerous territory, at least potentially. So, but she does eventually get her wardship with Yasna. So, um,
It
with lots of persistence.
it doesn't mention it quite yet, but soulcasters are very rare and very expensive. So if Yasna were to catch Shallan trying to steal the soulcaster, it would not end well for Shallan at all, or her like entire house. Like that's a country go to war with another country type of thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was just like, yeah, she'll probably get like in jail or something and then be sad.
No.
A little.
Stakes are high now.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess as far as that goes, so Shalon is. I'm curious. I don't know exactly where she's gonna go, but kind of on another note. So at the start of all of these chapters, at the start of the Kaladin chapters, and I think every chapter, right, even the Shalon chapters, it has this notion of like 30 seconds pre-death. That's what it says. And I wasn't sure about that because is it alluding to a certain moment, or is that just like a way they keep track of their years? What is everyone seems really different. So I didn't think it was like years, right? Because you have these preceding events right after each other that are very far apart in these seconds pre-death, which is listed at the start of each chapter. I didn't know if you could explain that.
I'll read one just to clarify what we're talking about here. This is the beginning of the prologue, actually. This is the title, or the title stanza, I guess, of the prologue. The love of men is a frigid thing, a mountain stream only 3 steps from the ice. We are his. O storm father, we are his. It is 1,000 days, and the Everstorm comes. Collected on the first day of the week Pala of the month Shash of the year 1171, 31 seconds before death. Subject was a dark-eyed pregnant woman of middle years. The child did not survive. And yeah, these are in front of each chapter. They vary, like, how many seconds pre-death and such. And I'm not going to explain any of it. That's a major spoiler. That's a major spoiler. I cannot expound upon that. I'm sorry.
I don't mind.
Yeah, those little bits at the beginning of the chapter, I believe those are called epigraphs, where the author gives you a little blurb at the very beginning of a chapter that's completely out of context. It might have something to do with the chapter, but it really doesn't fit with where you're at or what characters you're being around. And I do like that as a cool writing tool. It's a fun little, I don't know, puzzle pieces given to you one at a time. But yeah, the ones we've gotten so far, I have no clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, they're very cryptic.
I'm sure we'll find out in the next episode. So I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, you'll definitely find out by the next chapter for sure.
I'm sure just one more chapter, and
It's not like we have a solid 900 pages. 900 pages to go in this book, let alone the 2 other ones coming up.
We'll worry about those later. I'm sure next chapter we'll have our questions answered. I'm looking forward to it.
Something interesting that I noticed that's not specific to these chapters, but as I looked back, I noticed it's been throughout the book so far, and that is the fact that some of the names in the book are palindromes. They're the same forward as they are backwards, or very close. Some of them aren't quite palindromes, but they're close enough to catch my eye. And I thought this was really odd. I've never seen this used in a book, much less a fiction fantasy work like this, to have names that are palindromes. And I'm really wondering if this is significant or if this is not important at all, or what is going on with these. But it jumped out at me as we were reading, I think, the Shalon chapters. I'd seen enough names. It was like, wait a second, there's a pattern here.
So yes, that is deliberate, and they'll explain this later, so I'll kind of give a general synopsis. But yes, so the Vorin Church believes that if something is able to be folded in half perfectly, it's holy. So they name their children in the Vorin Church almost perfect palindromes to kind of give them a holy name, as a kind of tradition type of thing. So, yep, Kalak is a perfect palindrome. We've seen a couple other ones. Nomen, the moon. The moon's name is Nomen. That's a perfect palindrome. Shalon is close. Nohadon is close.
Yes.
So perhaps we're following somebody in the Vorin Church. Who knows? And there's been a couple other ones, but yes, that's a Vorin Church tradition of naming children palindromic names. So that will be explained later.
Interesting. I was impressed by it too, because some of these names are really long, and that was really what caught my eye too. Was one of the names, I think it was the name of the deity, the Almighty. I think Sherlon actually gave him a name in
Mm-hmm.
one of the chapters, and it's this really long name that as I read it, it just kind of stood out to me as, wait a second, that's the same backwards as it is forward. And I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I'm going to get completely wrong, but it starts with an E, and it's quite a long name, but that was an interesting thing that I've not seen used in a book before to name like that. So I'm going to be looking for more of those.
Trevor, our resident expert here on the books, are you able to say the name?
I
Give it your best attempt.
I can't think of the name off the top of my head. Can you type it for me, Elliot? Do you?
I can.
Do you have that kind of power?
I can also try to pronounce it for you, but I will completely butcher it. So I think I'll let you try.
I remember it being said. I must say, I did not catch on to this whole palindrome thing with the audiobook. Definitely would never have noticed. I'm glad you'll bring that up. I never would have made that assumption, like, in a million years.
I never would have caught it if I was listening to it either. Just the fact that I had the actual words in front of me and was able to kind of stare at it for a while, I noticed it. So yeah, something you definitely wouldn't pick up on, I don't think, if you were listening to the audiobook. You'd have to be listening real close.
Now that I read it, I think I can say it.
Go for it, Paul.
Okay, this is my best attempt. Elithanathile.
Okay.
I think. Did I leave something out?
Elithanathile. I do believe that's how they say it in the audiobook. And I'm very impressed, Elliot, that you got this as soon as you did, because
I don't see that.
I do see that now that I look at that. However, my first read through of the book was my first read through was audiobook, and it wasn't until my third read through that I actually read the ink and paper version. So it's not till they revealed and kind of explained it out later in the books that I understood that, oh yeah, there are a lot of palindromic names here. But yeah, that's pretty impressive that you realized that as soon as you did.
It's like 20 letters.
1 point for me.
So kind of the next little notion I'm wanting to talk about. My personal favorite part of this episode is finalizing what we know so far with Kaladin. So he's in his bridge crew now. Bridge 4 seems to be quite the difficult situation.
Hellhole, I think, is what you're trying to refer to.
Say the least.
Yes.
It's not a good spot. And going back to my words, perseverance, right? Kaladin seems to be at the lowest points imaginable. They're even talking at one point, they're like, oh, this is going to be nice. We're going to be slaves. We're going to do manual labor. It's going to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then they found out they're in the bridge crew, which was the very bad alternative. And so this is, I guess, the lowest of the low. Even within bridge crews, Bridge 4 supposedly is infamously bad. So Kaladin is struggling. There was everyone's dying around him, but I guess he keeps going on, sort of.
Let's pause and just acknowledge how low of a low Bridge 4 is. He's been in the bridge crew 2 weeks, and the first day there are 25 men that survive that first bridge run. Over the next out of 40. Over the next 2 weeks, 23 of those 25 men die, and the 24th that isn't him is transferred to another bridge crew and he dies there. So he is the one person who has survived 2 weeks on his bridge crew. Those death rates is completely unsustainable in any real sense. Those are absurd numbers.
Yeah,
It's like
it
more
makes
than
me
50%.
clearly think that Kaladin is fated to survive. Clearly, there's a reason that he's still alive because everyone else is dying. Like you said, this is just insane. Kaladin also mentions a couple times that the war just makes no sense to him, whether it's the just needless throwing away of lives or the strategy of what they're doing and the way the Bright Lords are conducting the war just makes no sense to him.
Mm.
And I think it talks about how he's in such a stupor at that point that he almost doesn't listen to that side of his brain, but the war veteran side of his brain is noticing this doesn't make any sense. What is going on?
So there was a quote that I wanted to read that highlights this, what you were saying, Elliot. It's on page 147 of my edition. And it really highlights the old Kaladin versus the new Kaladin of where he is now, of how low he is, and him kind of talking to himself of, you should care about this, you should be asking questions, and you're not. The old Kaladin might have wondered why the armies didn't work harder to defend the bridges. There's something wrong here, a voice inside him said. You're missing part of the puzzle. They waste resources and bridgemen lives. They don't seem to care about pushing inward and assaulting the Parshendi. They just fight pitched battles on plateaus, then come back to the camps and celebrate. Why? Why? He ignored that voice. It belonged to the man he had been. It's very much the definition of somebody who's struggling with depression. People who struggle with depression oftentimes do think of themselves before they've struggled with it as a different person, and that is something very definitive. That, and Brandon Sanderson's been asked about this. It does Kaladin struggle with depression? And yes, he that's what Brandon Sanderson's trying to get across here. Is he does struggle with clinical depression, and these are the symptoms that he should care about these lives that are being lost around him. He should be asking these questions, and he doesn't anymore. He doesn't care.
Yeah, it's really cool that he put such a real, relatable aspect into Kaladin's character there. That's really awesome. But it's definitely painful to watch Kaladin go through this, to experience some of that through him, where he's getting almost disconnected from his own self. He's in such despair.
For sure.
Feel bad for him.
However, we don't end part one on this low. We do get a bounce.
Somewhat, just a little bit.
That's all it takes. Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of a bounce to be headed in the right direction, and the rest is history.
So you mentioned his kind of, I don't know, two different, like thinking of his former self as a different person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important because, kind of as things progress, his very lowest is when he goes to the honor chasm, right? He's ready to kind of, he's completely through with everything. He's ready to be done with this. This is the only choice he has over his life now, is to end it himself. And he mentions that that Kaladin does die down at the honor chasm.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff, and this is not the normal Kaladin that you're dealing with anymore. We'll get more into that later, kind of, but I like that whole comparison of almost two different sides of Kaladin. I think it's really interesting, and I think we kind of see where one part kind of does die in a way, even though he does not die literally.
So I thought that first off, part one ended on a really epic note. I really enjoyed chapter 11. It really brought everything together for me. And I felt like going through this whole part one, the theme for me of part one was honor. We saw a couple different versions of honor throughout the whole part one. At the very beginning, we had Zeth, who killed and was going to do whatever it took, no matter what how terrible the task was, to uphold his honor or to follow his honor.
Yep.
And then we got Kaladin or young Kaladin, who thinks that fighting is how you gain honor, and a warrior is the one who gains honor. And then we get a couple mentions of the Bright Lords and how honorable they are, but then Kaladin kind of infers that maybe they're not quite as honorable as they sound like. And then we get to the Bridgemen and how the only thing honorable in air quotes that they can do left with their lives is kill themselves at
Mm-hmm.
the aptly or ironically named honor chasm. And yet then we get chapter 10, where Kaladin's father Lyrin completely spins all of this on its head by giving us the quote that I read earlier about saving lives. And he doesn't actually mention honor, but I really think that the lesson Lyrin, Kaladin's father, is trying to teach us is that all these forms of honor, are they really honor, or is saving someone's life more honorable than taking someone's life? And it was a very deep thought that I thought kind of ran through all of this part one, and I'm really curious if that's going to continue on, if that's going to be something that Kaladin deals with going forward as well, or if this is kind of the conclusion of that and Kaladin move on to other things. I'm really curious, and I really enjoyed part one.
Yeah, there's certainly that there are a lot of dramatic sides to honor, as like where there's Zeth on one far extreme and Kaladin's father Lyrin on the other far extreme, and there are plenty of people in the middle that we've already met, and plenty more that we
Yep.
will meet. This this chapter 11 where Kaladin recalls what his father says about honor and Syl saves him from the honor chasm, and this is where Kaladin's story begins. This is where he's really turned a new black bane leaf, if you will, to to decide to be to decide to save lives and make something of his life and the lives of the other bridgemen. And yeah, this is really Sanderson's hook of this is where the story begins. Now I'm going to talk about interludes that you don't know anything about next episode.
But backing up a little bit, my personal favorite part of this whole episode is the Kaladin flashback chapter. Chapter 10, we get to learn about Kaladin's father,
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of does a lot of teaching, one of my two words. And we learn a lot about kind of society and kind of how Kaladin was raised and the environment he grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was very interesting. And we get that iconic quote that Elliot read earlier about there are those who take lives and those who save lives. And it was awesome.
I got a lot of answers out of chapter 10. I feel like many of the chapters we've been reading lately, I just get more questions than I do answers. But 10 actually gave me more answers than questions, I think, which was cool. We got some answers on his father and his profession, that he was a surgeon and a really good one.
Yep.
And that answers why all of Kaladin's memories of his father seem to be medically related. Kaladin knows what to do when someone is injured, and he remembers his father in those moments, which now makes perfect sense because his father was a very good surgeon and even wanted Kaladin to become a surgeon and was training him.
Yep.
Which is where we get into that argument, which led to the quote that I read about Kaladin viewing war as this glorious go off and earn your honor in war, and his father, what was his father's name?
Lirin?
Lirin, I want to say.
Lirin.
Yeah, Lirin. So Lirin kind of gives him a little bit of a lesson that I don't know that Kaladin actually learns the lesson in this chapter, but perhaps he's learned it by the next chapter here when he has his big moment, and that is the fact that surgeons do an honorable thing too. In fact, perhaps an even more honorable thing by saving lives instead of taking them.
Yeah, young Kaladin asks his father, who tells stories of surgeons. Everyone tells stories of the great warriors and the great warlords of the past. Nobody talks about the surgeons that save lives. What honor is there in that? And he's in chapter 11 he sees at the honor chasm the honor in trying to fight to save lives as opposed to fight to conquer lives.
His foot is literally over the edge, and the thing that brings him back is Syl, his windspren, the little windspren that's been around with him, that's turning into quite the companion that actually left him back in chapter 9, which was a really sad moment for me. I was scared she wasn't going to come back.
Yeah.
But then to have her come back in this moment where Kaladin needs her the most, I felt some emotion pull at me in that moment for sure. Of yes, Syl came back and saved him, and she does it in such a characteristic Sylphrena way, where she's brought him. What did she bring him? She brought him a
Blackbane.
Blackbane, that's what it's called.
Yep.
Yeah, Blackbane leaf, and she brings it to him because she thinks that he likes those kinds of things because he had one before, and she doesn't even understand that she just brought him a deadly poison, and
Right.
Kaladin kind of laughs, but just that kind of innocent, honest. I'm trying to help you, even though I don't really know what I'm doing, and this really doesn't help you at all. Even just that is enough to pull Kaladin out of his dark place and start him on that path of kind of rebirth almost. Paul, you talked about the fact that he treats that Kaladin as no, I died down there at the honor chasm, and now it's a new me. It's a moment of rebirth for him, really, which is really powerful. I thought that was the most powerful chapter we've read so far.
True. I do really love the Sylphrena moment. I think it's hilarious. Also with how hard she worked.
Yeah.
She's carrying this leaf and she's like, this is so heavy, like I've carried it forever. But I wanted to make you happy, you know, and it's literally like a poisonous leaf used
my
to
heart, Sylphrena, my heart.
He originally had intentions, you know, to like poison to Volkov, his like slave owner or whatever, you know, and that's why he's holding on to it. And she just knows that he held on to it, and you know, and then he lost it, and so she wanted to, you know, to give him back something that he had lost. And I think the notion that, you know, she cared for him and she paid attention was really like probably impactful for him. And kind of just this notion that Kaladin has now at this point with, you know, just kind of always going forward and stuff. It's kind of, you know, it kind of forces that motive and stuff. I also think when you bring up Sylphrena, I think there's a little bit of comparison. It might be kind of a stretch, but I think there's a little comparison between the relationship Kaladin and Sylphrena have with the relationship between like Shallan and Yalb. There's kind of like it is different. It's kind of a stretch there, right? With Shallan and Yalb, you know, Shallan is very intelligent, um, but a little bit naive and such.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's kind of learning a lot of the ways that people really work in the world, like I guess outside of books and such, where Yalb kind of knows that end. And I feel like Kaladin and Syl is a more exaggerated version of that. Where Kaladin's very smart, he knows a lot of things, and Syl just brand new, like a little kid almost, you know, very naive and such. But there's kind of that comparison, everything, and Syl kind of has that caring nature, kind of like Shallan has, you know. If you look back at Shallan and her like sketches and stuff, she wanted to sketch like pictures of Yalb and such, kind of as like a token of her appreciation almost for what he did, and uh, not exactly the same, but you could compare it to Syl and her act of kindness here. But I think there's a connection between these pairs in some way, and I'm kind of curious to see if they develop further, or if maybe we see more similarities one day.
Yeah, I noticed it. I noticed the same thing, Paul. I thought the comparison to those two contrasting relationships or contrasting personality types was very interesting, and how they balance each other out, right? Where Shallan is smart but a little naive, like you said, and Y'all balances that out with his streetwise, and then but Y'all was exactly what Shallan needs in her moment, where she's at the bookstore getting ripped off, and Y'all comes in to save the day. Then you flip over to Kaladin and Syl, where again, Syl balances out Kaladin's despair and painful experience existence that he's in right now with just her honest and innocent perspective, and that's exactly what Kaladin needs in that moment to kind of pull him out of that. And it's a cool comparison, I thought.
It's just a little bit more traumatic with the Kaladin and Syl chapter as opposed to
Yeah,
the
sure.
Little bit,
the
yes.
Yalb and
Little
Shallan
bit.
chapter. Both Yalb and Yalb and Syl are saving them from a bad circumstance. It's just Syl is, and both of them are doing it in an endearing way, but Syl is literally saving Kaladin's life, and Yalb,
One's a little heavier than the other, for
Yes.
sure.
Yes, yeah. One is more exaggerated. But Kalak was mentioned, and I thought that was really interesting. Back from the prelude, I guess we're kind of getting callbacks to, or at least relating to chapter 1 and the prelude now a little bit. Kalak is mentioned with Trevor. You mentioned Taft earlier, the bridgeman,
Mhm.
who Kaladin, after he died down there at the Honor Chasm, he's ready to take charge of this bridge, and either it's gonna excel or he's gonna die trying. That kind of attitude. And Talap, just a simple mention of Kalak knows that's true whenever they're talking. It
Mhm.
makes me wonder, learn about Kalak, if he's some. It's kind of an expression almost like Stormfather,
Mhm.
um, in that maybe Kalak is some god or one of these heralds or something. So I don't know, just a little.
It does feel like,
That's,
I'm gonna make a guess that Kalak is one of the heralds. I think going back to the prelude, there's I think enough evidence for me to guess that we were witnessing the heralds back in the prelude, and I think Kalak is one of them. But yeah, that reference to him is almost in a negative sense, which makes me think that Kalak is maybe the Judas of the heralds. We'll see. Which maybe
Okay.
that lines up with what we saw in the prelude. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. That were some of my thoughts on it.
Interesting. Yep, we met Kalak, Yezrian in the prologue, and the guy that they mentioned that they left in Damnation, his name was Taln. So, yes, Kalak is mentioned again, and he is mentioned in kind of a term of phrase type of way where people just say, "Oh, Kalak knows that's true."
yeah, it's at least a common knowledge name.
Right.
Everyone would recognize or briefly know who
Right.
Kalak is. So that's what gave me that assumption.
And he does have to be somebody pretty important for his name to be thrown around 4,500 years later.
Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah, quite the jump.
All right. So Kaladin is saved. Shallan gets her wardship. Do we have any other closing thoughts on these chapters?
Gaz is the worst.
Gaz is the worst. Okay.
He gets a little bit of comeuppance though, not completely, but Kaladin gets to stand up to him.
That I liked that part. Yeah, Gaz is the character that's put there for you to dislike, I think, and Kaladin kind of socks it to him at the end, and I enjoyed that.
I am so excited to read more. Part 1 ended on a big high. I really want to dive deeper now.
Yep.
Can't wait to get more questions I don't know the answer to.
All right. Let's see you guys next week.
Laters.